We're starting a new series today, Answers. During the holiday season, there's a lot of people who just get really kind of down during the holidays, and so we're just gonna take a couple weeks this month and next month to just kind of talk about what the Bible has to say about grieving and sorrow and those kinds of things. So, in your growing, we've been talking about growing for a while. In that growing, you're gonna have a lot of hiccups that come. And you're going to think, I'm not growing, I'm not where God wants me to be, I don't have it together, I'm just such a terrible Christian. You're going to think all these things. And here's the thing, though, those hiccups, they are part of your growing, too. We think that our growing is a straight, I'm going to read the Bible every day, I'm going to pray every day, nothing's going to go wrong, I'm going to seek God, it's going to be great. It's not going to go like that, though. It's going to be a lot like this. And there's going to be a lot of problems that come, and you're going to lose focus, you're going to get caught up in this, caught up in that. You're going to have times of just serious backwards in your faith. And that's a part of your growing. Those times of sorrow, those times of hiccups in your faith, that's a part of your growing. And I always find this funny here. And I even have a little chart on the screen to kind of show. It's not really a chart. That's maybe overemphasizing what it is. But a little diagram, I guess, to show you. So when you go through pain, do you notice that everybody is a genius? Everybody knows how to solve your problem, how to solve your pain, how to solve your suffering. And everybody. But then, when you are the person going through pain, nothing anybody says is good enough. So that inevitably leads to this. Go to that picture there, Shane. That's what it inevitably leads to. You've got two people who are just not seeing eye to eye. Hey, well, if you just do this, all your problems would be solved. And the other person's saying, hey, if you just leave me alone, all my problems would be solved. And so you have this headbutting that happens. And the thing is, whenever you're going through a point of pain and suffering, anything anybody says is just going to sound flippant, like shallow. It's not going to sound like you just don't know. You know what I mean? And I understand, and for good reason, they probably don't know what you're going through. So let's just get that out of the way. But here's the thing. You individually have to reach a certain point of decision in your faith. A certain point of decision where you say, no, this is going to be my focus. You can either focus on the things that are really not good, or you can focus on hope. Either way, you're going to have to go through the pain that you're going through. When you're going through grief, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Nobody knows what you feel like. I get that. And anything somebody says, it's not going to land. But the thing is, you have to come to a point for yourself where you choose, how are you going to respond to this? Are you going to grow and move past it, or is this going to be where you plant your flag in the dirt? So the main point I want to get across today is wisdom is limited in pain. When we read through the Bible, we get the book of Proverbs, and that says, okay, these are all the typical things of how you should act. Let wisdom guide your life. Okay. And for the most part, it ends up better for you if you are guided by wisdom. But then you get to this very troublesome book, Job, and that's the book we're going to look at today. And in the book of Job, we basically have the big problem that wisdom isn't enough to get you through pain. There's not always an answer. You can't always just do better or fix it yourself. Sometimes you get in a losing situation where there is no winning. Sometimes you get in a situation where it's just pain after pain. So let's read some of Job and kind of go through it, okay? We're starting in verse 1. There was a man in the country of Uz named Job. He was a man of complete integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. Now, if you notice, the Bible is oftentimes a book of extremes. It's not that Job was just a pretty good guy. He was a very righteous man. See what I mean? It goes to great lengths to show how righteous he was, and then it's going to go to great lengths to show how many bad things happened. And this is a very interesting way of, when you're writing a story, to help the audience to relate. Are you as righteous as Job? Well, probably not. Do you have all the things bad happen that Job happened to him? Well, probably not. So you have this kind of, you can kind of get it, you know what I mean? And obviously Job points forward to Christ, the suffering servant, and all those things. Yes, absolutely. But not really for what we have to talk about today. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. His estate included 7,000 sheep and goats, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large number of servants. Job was the greatest man among all the people of the East. Did you notice the way that it ordered it? Okay, it said about how he was righteous, then it talks about his kids, and then it talks about his belongings. Remember that, okay? His sons used to take turns having banquets at their homes. They would send an invitation to their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. Whenever a round of banqueting was over, Job would send for his children and purify them, rising early in the morning to offer burnt offerings for all of them. For Job thought, maybe, just maybe, perhaps my children have sinned, having cursed God in their hearts. And this was Job's regular practice. He didn't do this just every once in a while. He's doing this on a regular basis, very faithful to it. So then we think, okay, so this is a righteous man. Surely, if somebody deserved for nothing bad to happen to him, it would be this guy. Surely he's God's favorite because he's really got his act together, so nothing's going to happen to this guy. Well, then you hop down in the story, and I'm skipping a lot of the story. There's this whole scene in heaven that plays out with Satan and God, and feel free to read Job yourself. But for the sake of today, I just want to focus on what happens here on earth. Verse 13, one day when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and reported, while the oxen were plowing and the donkeys grazing nearby, the Sabaeans swooped down and took them away. They struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. He was still speaking when another messenger came and reported, God's fire fell from heaven. Not simply, hey, there was an accident. No, God's fire itself fell from heaven. It burned the sheep and the servants and devoured them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. That messenger was still speaking when yet another came and reported. The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, made a raid on the camels, and took them away. They struck down the servants with the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Now, if you know anything about pain and suffering, you'll know that pain always comes in sets of 3. So we've hit our 3. We're good. We're good. Whew, that was a close call. He was still speaking when another messenger came. Missed it by that much. And reported, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on the young people so that they died, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So if you see, we have a complete reversal of the way they were all introduced. It was introduced Job, and then his kids, and then his possessions. Now we've got his possessions are taken away. Now his kids are taken away. Now let's see what happens with Job. And we hop down to chapter 2. So Satan left the Lord's presence, this is a second time, which we skipped over the first time, and infected Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery to scrape himself while he sat among the ashes. And you might ask, why did you just pick out all the bad things happen and skip over all the rest of the stuff? Because when we're going through pain, we only pay attention to the bad things that are happening, and we ignore all the rest. Life doesn't stop just because you're in pain, but you don't know about the rest of life. You forget about it. Then there's one day that comes, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10, who knows, when you walk outside and you realize that the sun is still shining. And for a lot of people, the holidays are just a reminder of all that they've lost. And I think that the story of Job is a very relatable story. So Job is sitting on the ground scraping himself with a pot, and his wife says to him, are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. And you know, there is a joke here, okay? Don't take it too seriously, but there is a joke here. Satan took everything from Job, but he didn't take the wife. He left that as his gift to Job. And here we have Job enjoying that gift to its fullest. Then Job, I'm sorry, I missed the slide. After this, Job began to speak and curse the day he was born. So you have a lot of bad things happening to him, and it really seems like nobody's in Job's corner. For good reason, there is nobody in Job's corner. It seems like even God himself has turned his back on Job. So this is a very, very just overwhelming situation. It goes from bad to worse to worse to worse, and by the time you're like, okay, God, I get it. I get it. I'm not your favorite. You hate me. I got it. Let's move on now. And the story keeps going. We're just at the beginning. There's like 42 chapters of Job. Maybe 43. I don't remember exactly. So when we get to Job chapter 3, verse 1, where it says, after this, Job began to speak and curse the day he was born. This is what we do. Okay, are you ready for it? Well, he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have said that. Because that's what we do when we see somebody suffering. They say stupid things because they're in pain. And we become the genius. We have all the answers. Oh, they shouldn't say this. This is how you get out of this problem. If you would just do this, you wouldn't have these problems, Job. And that's exactly what Job's friends do. 3 of these hooligans come by, and they've got all the solutions for Job. They've got all the answers. If you just listen to us. And that's exactly what we do when we see people suffering. Well, he was probably suffering because of this. And since I am blessed because I did this. And we might not do it with the story of Job because we've read the beginning chapters, but we do it with other people in our lives, right? We see somebody going through suffering and we say, oh, they're finally getting what they deserve. I knew I didn't like this guy, and now finally God has admitted that he doesn't like this person either. Yes! And the reason why I've got this house and this car and this job is because I am the chosen favorite. Because surely God would never allow one of his favorites to go through anything that is unfortunate or terrible, despair. And if you notice, as it always seems to happen, when you go through suffering, when Job goes through this suffering, it all kind of hits at once, doesn't it? Like clockwork. It can't spread itself out. It's always got to jump us all at the same time. And then when we start to kind of lose our bearings and we think, oh man, I can figure this out, lo and behold, something else comes by and knocks us further off. And then we have the what did my dad used to call it, the peanut gallery, that always had the solutions to all your problems. And when you get into this place, and thankfully not everybody has gone in this place, and thankfully not everybody will go in this place, it is a place of complete despair. And the thing is, everybody has a different breaking point. You can literally go through the exact same thing as somebody else, but for them it was a breaking point, and for you it wasn't. It's a crazy thing. So what we are tempted to do is we say, well, that's not so bad, I've done that. You have no idea what they're going through. You have gone through a similar situation, you can relate. That does not mean that you know what they're going through. We all think that we do, though. I told this story, and please don't take offense to this. We all have our moments of saying something stupid. After my mom passed, there was this guy that they came up to my dad and he said, I know what you're feeling. I know what you're going through. And, you're waiting for some grand revelation. He says, my dog died a couple weeks ago. I don't think that those two things are similar. Now, in his head, it probably was similar, but for me, it's just a little bit like maybe you should just close your mouth if you don't have anything productive to say. Just shh. But we grow and we learn, don't we? We grow and we learn. And the thing that happens with Job, and this is an amazing thing, because you don't pay attention to some things until you've gone through something similar, and then all of a sudden, Scripture just comes alive when you've gone through it. Did you notice that all of Job's blessings became curses? Did you notice? All of his many blessings that it starts out the book saying Job was blessed with this and this and this and this, they all turn to curses. This is a very dark place that Job is in, and his friend's response, well, Job, what you did wrong here is... When he had all those kids, they were just more kids to mourn when they died. When he had all those riches, they were just more riches to lose. When he had all those friends, they were just more people to tear him down. They all had answers for how he could fix the situation. But they were kind of moot answers. The whole book of Job can be summarized as wisdom doesn't always win out the day. Sometimes there is no winning. Sometimes there is no answer. Sometimes there is no clear way out of your pickle. Sometimes that's just the situation you're in. It's not because you did something wrong. It's not because God hates you. It's not because you're a sinner. It's not because God whatever. No. Sometimes, some people, not everybody, thank God, but some people just go through overwhelming loads of grief and despair. The correct answer when you see somebody do this is not to say, hey, I know what you're going through. The correct answer is just sit in silence. Let them say something stupid. It's fine. It's not the end of the world if they say something stupid out of pain. And we never really expect the day of despair. I don't think any of us do. But when it comes on us, we're always so surprised that God would ever let something that unpleasant happen to us. Don't we? How could you let this happen, God? Well, we know there's just a ticking time bomb before we experience grief and suffering in this life, right? The trick is to die before it hits you. So you expect people to give you time when you're going through pain. Let me just rip this Band-Aid off. People won't give you time. You'll be suffering and grieving. People will not give you time. They will try and throw you right back into it. Don't take it personally. Don't take it against them. Let them do whatever they're going to do, and then you kind of just withdraw yourself and pray and get your attitude right. Because they're not just going to stop. You can't yell at every single one of them. People will always be like that. It's just the way it is. Whenever we're always tempted to say, well, I know what you're going through. I went through the same thing. It's not a competition. It's not a competition as far as who went through worse grieving. So when you see somebody going through grieving, don't feel like you have to justify yourself. Like, I do know what you're going through. It's not a competition. If it is too much for you to bear, if the pain is too much for you to bear, it is too much for you to bear. That's just the way of it. Nobody else is going to know what you're going through because they're not in your shoes. They haven't had your life. They haven't walked through your path. They're not going to know. It's all right. Let them think whatever they want to think. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to validate yourself. Let yourself grieve. Unfortunately, a lot of times in church culture, we have this idea that it is a sin to grieve. We're going to look at this more next week, but we have this idea that, hey, you got to snap out of it really fast. Get back to it. Get back to your ministry. Get back. That's extremely unhealthy. There's nothing wrong with grieving. You lose somebody, take the time. Grieve. It's fine. Really, it is fine. You don't think that God's going to be mad at you because you're not as productive as you were before. And that's exactly what we do. We play mind games with ourselves, and we give ourselves guilt trips. Oh, God's mad at me because I've lost my importance. You were never saved by anything more than grace anyways. It was always grace. I think that's kind of a good thing, though, because, hey, if it was up to how good you can be for God to save you, I think we would all kind of be up a creek without a paddle. I don't know about you, perfect specimens, but I've made so many mistakes, I lost count of my mistakes. And I'm still young. The night is young. So we get to Job 42, verse 7, and he says this. God comes up to Job, literally God himself. Have you ever been through a time of suffering when God himself reveals himself to you? No, you haven't. But that's exactly what happens in Job. It's not just simply God spoke to his heart. No, God shows up on the scene and spends numerous chapters telling Job that he doesn't know what he's talking about. God, I'm your PR guy here, and I don't know if you know this, God, but you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to show up to the scene and pat them on the back and tell them everything's going to be okay. You missed your cue here, God. But that's not what God does. That's not what he does. He shows up on the scene and tells them, you have no idea what you're talking about. Have you ever gone to somebody grieving and say, hey, you widow, you who've just been in a divorce, you who just lost a child, hey, you have no idea what you're talking about. And yet that's exactly what we see happening in the book of Job. And then when this happens, Job's response is even more uncanny. The whole time through the book, he's trying to say, hey, I just want to be validated, that I was righteous. I want to be proven right. Then God shows up, he says, you have no idea what you're talking about. And he says, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm going to close my mouth now. What a bizarre series of events. And obviously the book of Job has so much depth to it that you cannot summarize it with a simple sentence. I wish I could say real quick, this is the answer to the book. There isn't a real quick answer to the book. It's a wisdom book. It's meant for you to ponder, for you to sit there and wrestle with. That's what it's there for. So Job 42:7 says, after the Lord had finished speaking to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, which is one of Job's friends, I am angry with you and your two friends, for you have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has. Job has spent the entire book whining and complaining and crying out to God in his pain and suffering. He spent the entire book doing that. We don't know how long this was. Was it months? Was it years? I don't know. Maybe Job was going off for years before his friends finally opened up their mouths. We don't know. We do know that he was suffering, and in his suffering, he said some things that maybe aren't exactly 100% true. And yet at the final account of all things, God doesn't say, now you all said a bunch of things that weren't necessarily true. No, he says, Job has spoken correctly of me. Do you know some of the things that Job says about God in the book of Job? And at the final bit of the book, final chapter, he says, Job has spoken rightly. You three have not. So Job ranted and raved. He was angry with God. He was grief-stricken. He said things that he probably shouldn't have said, yet he was not reprimanded. In fact, the opposite happened. He had to pray for his friends who were very unhelpful. How would you like that? These people who've been telling you basically you got what you deserved and you're being punished by God because you did some sin you don't know about, because God would never curse somebody who has done everything right. Now you have to go and pray for them. Pray for their well-being. By show of hands, who is willing to pray for those who are actively cursing on them while they're going through the pain of losing all of their children? Nobody? No takers? Yeah, I wouldn't do that either. And yet Job doesn't even argue with God about this. He's okay. And he prays for his three friends. Amazing story. And I think the biggest reason why Job was not reprimanded by God is because in his pain, Job went to God. Job never claimed to have all the answers. And what's more, Job never got an answer to the problem. The entire theme of Job is this: why do righteous people suffer? The answer? There isn't one. It never gives an answer as to why righteous people suffer. Read through the whole book. Read it as many times as you want. He never says, this is why you suffered. In fact, as far as we know, the whole scene that plays out in heaven where Satan is going before God, Job never even finds out about that. This is what Job knows. All hell broke loose in my life, and nobody was there for me. And then I was sad for a very, very long time. I'm still pretty sad. And God shows up on the scene after a bunch of smart alecks shoot off their mouth and tells me that I have no idea what I'm talking about. Boy, talk about not having closure. But the thing was that in his pain, when he was crying out to God, that wasn't good enough for the experts. Job is crying out to God in chapter 3. Oh, I wish I'd never been born. We read it at the beginning of the service. Oh, I wish I'd never been born. He's in grief and despair, and it's not good enough for his friends. What did it matter to them how he expressed his sorrow? It didn't. You got this guy picking at scabs on his body with a broken piece of pot. Leave him alone. But they had to just shoot off their mouth. They had to just keep saying. They had to keep poking the bear. Have you ever gone to somebody that's sad and just kept having to say something? You notice how mad they get, how fast they get mad? It's probably not the best course of action, but they just double down. And then finally there's this blissed moment towards the middle of the book where they finally shut up. They've been beaten at all their arguments. They finally close their mouth. And this other young guy comes and he says, I know I'm young, but I've got all the answers. God doesn't even answer the guy. He doesn't even acknowledge the guy's existence. He just gets past him and talks about the friends that needed to. You didn't say what was right. And the thing is that I want to kind of, as we get towards the end of this, there's something that I think is worth mentioning. In the world, we're told all these different things of how to deal with our grieving. Some people try and deal with it with different, things like drugs or sleeping around or this or that other thing. And we're always told in the world that there's these different things that are somehow going to fix all of our pain. And some of the things that we're told about is if you just get an answer. If I would just go to counseling and my counselor could tell me the reason why you struggle with this is because your parents did this to you when you were a kid. Okay, and that helps you move forward how? Well, it doesn't. You just know now that all your problems are your parents' faults. That's it. It doesn't move you forward. Well, at least I know that I can hate my dad. But it doesn't move you forward. And so we read through the book of Job, and the first thing we see is the arguments didn't work. There was no rationale, no clear explanation. None of the arguments of his friends was good enough. The second thing we see, no amount of soul searching was good enough. You hear this all the time in books and movies nowadays. You just go off by yourself and you just do a little bit of soul searching and you find your inner self and you get enlightenment. And no, that didn't work for Job. It didn't. Another thing that doesn't work, another thing that to keep in mind is at the end of the book, God blesses Job with more kids and more possessions. but his original kids were still dead. See, when I was a kid, I read that and I thought, oh, the story ends with a perfect conclusion, and then I became a father who lost a child, and I said, no, there is no resolution to the story. At the end of the day, you don't have the problem is resolved. You have Job walking with the problem. And the answers weren't good enough. The soul searching wasn't good enough. And his kids are still dead. We end the story with Job not on a high note. We end the story with life continuing on. And Job has to carry it. I know that Job likely struggled for the rest of his life with sorrow, depression. Why do I know that? Because I've been there. And I didn't even have it that bad. I just lost one. Job's entire future sucked in an instant. A situation he couldn't win and he couldn't fix. But God won't let you have that, right? He won't ever give you more than you can handle. Well, the Job must have been a pretty strong guy. So more blessings did come on Job. They always do. Sometimes we don't see them, but they always are there. He meets with God face to face. That is not the greatest, the most common occurrence. And God's presence did help. But ultimately, Job didn't get an answer, and he didn't get the problem taken away. So we're left with Job, this book that seems very unnecessary. Because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit our way of thinking. It doesn't solve our problems. It just ponders them. It ruminates on the fact that we have no idea why things happen, and we are not in control of them. So what can you do with this? What can we take away from this? How can we possibly learn from something that never resolves itself? Well, for those of you who are going through pain or have gone through intense pain, I think that the book of Job, you know exactly what's being said. And the first thing, tread very gently. If you are not going through pain, tread very gently. You do not know the situation. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what their heart is. You don't know. And it's okay. You don't have to know. You don't have to operate from a place of arrogance to help somebody else who's suffering. You can operate from a place of, I have no idea, but I'll sit with you. I have no idea, but I'll pray with you. That's okay. You don't have to have all the world's answers. Tread gently. I pity the fool who, when they see somebody suffering, they have all the answers. What if the Lord was to return on you the despair that you discredited in them? Would your tune still be the same? And when we see somebody suffering, we inevitably reach this point. We say this, well, it's been long enough. They need to get up and get going. Grief really has no time limit. It doesn't. People grieve for however long they grieve for. Sometimes they hop through the 5 stages and they're fine, and sometimes they get stuck on one, and sometimes they just repeat it over and over again. Sometimes they go straight to anger, and they carry that around for years upon years, and you say, this person's really angry. No, that person's really grieving. And there's a difference between the two. We don't have to discredit somebody's pain. And I would end this tread gently with this. Who appointed you as judge? It doesn't matter if you think you know why somebody else is suffering. It doesn't matter. Keep your mouth shut. Nobody appointed you as judge. You don't know. Tread very gently. Very gently. And the second thing I think we can take away from this little, very brief look at Job is, don't take it to heart. When people say stupid things, and they're going to, don't take it to heart. You're going to go through pain. Nobody knows what you're going through. Okay. But they are going to say a bunch of stupid things. And when they do, don't take it to heart. Just let it go. Seek God, just like Job did. Even if you don't have the right prayers. What I hear from people who are grieving is they always say this, I just don't know what to pray. It's okay. You don't have to know what to pray. Job didn't know what to say. The point is that you're taking it to God. Even if you don't have the right prayers, take it to God. When people say something stupid, work towards forgiveness. You're going to have a hard time forgiving them. It might even take years. Work towards it. Little baby steps, one day at a time. Because you don't want to become that person who remembers all the stupid things that people said when you were in pain. You don't want to be that person. One day you'll wake up and you'll realize you're a very foul person. So let them say their stupid things, forgive them. And give it time when you're grieving. Give it time. You're not going to feel better overnight. You're not going to feel alive again overnight. Give it time. Job had to pray for his friends, and I think that he was gradually, slowly getting to the point of forgiving them over time. I don't think that he was letting the offenses build up. I think that he was getting upset. If you read the dialogue, it's very obvious he was getting upset. But I think that Job didn't allow that attitude to fester because of how he responds at the end of the book. I could be wrong. Lord, I pray you give us patience and grace as we both are going through pain and are around other people who are going in pain. That we would just be patient with the grieving process, whether it's in ourselves or in somebody else. Lord, help us to remember that we got grace from you when we didn't deserve it. So, Lord, help us to show grace also when it's not deserved. Anybody can show grace when everything's fine. It's hard when everything's not fine. Lord, I pray you'd give us clarity in pain and comfort in pain. Your word says that you are the God of all peace, the God of all comfort. Lord, if it takes years, that we would wait on the revelation of that peace and comfort. We know that it is you who meets us at death and carries us over. So then, Lord, I pray you'd also meet us in life and carry us through. Help us be your arms and feet to the hurting, Lord, even if we don't feel like they deserve it and even if they're saying something stupid. Lord, temper our words, our mouth, with honey, with sweetness. There would be an arm of grace to those who are hurting.